Rooted in Product isn't just a company name, it's Brian Root's philosophy. After saving 15,000 hours at Amazon and scaling $100 million products at Walmart Labs, Brian launched Rooted in Product to bring elite product strategy to B2C startups. He walked away from big tech's corner office playbook to prove startups could have enterprise-level impact without the enterprise baggage.
What does good look like when you're talking about product development, right? I've never, still to this day, worked in an environment that was so laser focused on getting to the source of truth.
At Amazon, he learned the brutal difference between good and great.
That company simply went out of business. It really, I think, fundamentally kind of shook my confidence in that career path.
And then everything collapsed.
20 people at a time report to a CPO. It's really turning into an environment for most companies of execute on my idea, figure it out, but if you can't, sink or swim.
This is the reality most startups never admit. Chaos disguised as strategy.
When you're a fractional, it's almost as if they're inviting you to come in and tell them everything that they're doing wrong.
But Brian discovered the secret weapon. Leaders listen when you're not on their payroll full time.
The changes that need to happen are in some way being blocked by the CEO. I've come to view my work as CEO whispering.
The biggest barrier to progress? The person in charge. And Brian knows how to break through.
Drive shifts in the mentality and the culture very quickly. I get excited because I'm not the only agent of change here anymore.
Fractional doesn't mean smaller. It means faster, sharper, deeper.
You are not your customer. I see this at early stages and really late stages alike.
And if there's one truth founders still don't get, it's this. Rooted in Product isn't just a company name, it's Brian Root's philosophy. After saving 15,000 hours at Amazon and scaling $100 million products at Walmart Labs, Brian launched Rooted in Product to bring elite product strategy to B2C startups without the overhead. Today, we unpack how a fractional CPO can deliver enterprise impact without acting like one. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. So let's just jump right in. You've worked alongside, inside of tech giants like Amazon and Walmart Labs, big companies. What lessons did those experience that you have there, did you find most transferable to smaller B2C companies?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think this is something that a lot of people who've worked in those environments tend to struggle with when they do move to, smaller, earlier stage companies. And that was not a plan that I had in mind when I worked at the big tech companies. So that was definitely something that I ran into as well. But I think what I learned really that stuck with me the most at those big companies, primarily Amazon, was fundamentally, what does good look like when you're talking about product development, right? I've never, still to this day, worked in an environment that was so laser focused on getting to the source of truth, to making sure that all ideas were properly validated, to ensuring, a really high level of rigor in almost every aspect of the process. And I think that really clarifies for you what it is actually possible to build with technology, right? I think a lot of us, have tools at our fingertips and we're like, oh, I can go build something very quickly, very easily. And we get a certain perspective of, that's good enough. But I think until you've really pushed something to kind of that next level at a company like Amazon.
So what sparked the idea behind starting Rooted in Product? And was there maybe a particular moment where you said to yourself, well, it's time to go fractional?
Yeah, that's, again, a bit of an unplanned, certainly entertaining journey for me at the moment. So what really sparked it, I would say, is, it's called the previous 10, 12 years of my tech career coming out of business school had, at least at a very zoomed out perspective, been, a kind of slow, steady climb, up the org chart, really with my intended goal to hit, the CPO level or equivalent at, called a mid-sized tech company, right? And that felt like a very, achievable goal in a lot of senses. It was kind of, not necessarily something that was immediately happening, but I could at least see the path, right? And what changed really was, first of all, I had a couple of, call them a little bit unsatisfying stints at startups, right? The environment was not exactly what I hoped it to be. Didn't quite, get the impact that I was looking for out of it. And then I moved to a slightly larger, more mature, not quite, technically startup, but startup environment. And that company simply went out of business, right? For reasons that, are probably too long to get into on this podcast. But that was a really eye-opening moment for me. I'd never been at a company that seemed that mature, yet suddenly, existentially no longer in existence at all. And it really, I think, fundamentally kind of shook my confidence in that career path, right? Not only for myself, but is tech in general as sure of a career path as I thought it was previously.
Excellent. I mean, I I do fractional CTO work, so I completely relate to what you're saying. But how does being a fractional CPO give you an edge that maybe a full-time executive might not have?
So I think there's two ways I can answer that. One, I think I'm bringing, obviously outsized experience and impact for the amount of money that I'm getting paid, right? That is kind of the value proposition for these companies, right? You can bring me in at, what's effectively a reduced rate on your books, and I can give you, the impact that you would get from, high-powered executive in, half the time, call it. So the amount of change that I found that I'm able to drive in a very rapid period of time, especially compared, to the rates that I am charging my clients, I think is a really compelling value prop based on, a lot of the experience that I am bringing to the table. The other is more related to kind of the dynamic of being a fractional, which I did not anticipate, but I'm actually finding quite interesting, in that my experience being hired, as a director, a VP, et cetera, is often you're being viewed as, kind of there to solve a very long-term problem, but in a way that is kind of within the constraints of the company, right? They're not necessarily looking for somebody to change their ways of working, even if they say they are. A lot of the time, that's kind of, lip service to a large extent. And so when you come with a new approach, with an observation about, hey, we've been doing things for 5 to 10 years, maybe not quite the right way, a lot of the times those things kind of get amped down, or at least they are scary things to say when your full-time paycheck is beholden on, whoever your boss is, the CEO, agreeing with you on these things. The dynamic is very shifted in my experience when you're a fractional. It's almost as if they are inviting you to come in and tell them everything that they're doing wrong, right? And I found that kind of on both sides, right? I've had a lot of conversations with, folks who are part of these organizations where within the first hour of meeting them, they'll start telling me things about, I've never said this to anybody. I've never, expressed this to our CEO, but these are the things that I think are really wrong with, our process, our company, or whatever. And I'm able to just kind of soak that in, ident of being a pseudo outsider, even though I am, working for that company. And reciprocally for the CEOs as well. I have found they are very open to hearing what I have to say in a way that I've never experienced as a full-time employee, which again, not something I expected, but again, it really, I think, just amplifies the amount of impact that I can have as a fractional.
Well, yeah, and you had mentioned that you can have that impact in half the time. You've helped companies hit profitability, you've helped them scale fast. How are you having that kind of impact though without being embedded full time?
I think a large part of it is pattern recognition. Having been part of the tech industry, building products for 15 plus years now, you start to see a lot of similarities. I find myself saying very frequently to pretty much every company I've talked to recently, your problems are not unique, right? This is just a variation of, the 3 or 4 problems that every tech company has. And frankly, if you want to go find, buy the book solution, I can recommend you 10 books. I can recommend you 2 podcasts to listen to. There's all these resources out there. Where the real work starts is, why are you not doing that? What's holding you back? Right? Because it's not a knowledge gap anymore. All the frameworks, all the approaches that you could possibly want are already well documented. You can find them easily. You can go to ChatGPT. It'll feed you 17 things you never thought of before, right? It's the kind of the organizational weight, the people, maybe the culture, these aspects that are holding things back. And I think one of the things that allows me to move very quickly here is just being able to cut through all that noise, right? I can be very clear up front. I'm not here to shove a framework down your throat. You want that? frankly go hire somebody else. Like, I will implement a framework at some point. I will give you a process, but that's not the important part right now. We need to figure out, why is this not working for you, right? Where is the blockage? Is it, within people, within process, within culture, any of those things? And so I think, there's a lot of wasted time. I don't want to call it wasted, but there's a lot of time that is normally spent when you're onboarding onto a company, trying to acclimate to the culture, trying to figure out, how are the ways of working? How do I fit in? I can cut through all of that and just say, I'm not here to fit in. I'm here to figure out why it's not working. Right. And that enables a much faster approach, I think.
So do you have a process for like gaining a fast understanding of their product landscape? And, because you're coming in as a fractional leader, so you don't have the prior knowledge or, the embedded knowledge. So do you have a process for that? Like, and what is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, at the risk of making it sound stupidly simple, I start with talking to all of the involved stakeholders, right? And I think just from those conversations, approaching that process as I would, being a PM, trying to dig 5 levels down of, why is this the case? Why, right? And simply through those conversations, I often get, kind of a loose framework for, here's how the company's operating, here's who else I need to talk to. Here are the, recommendations that I can put in front of the CEO, at least in terms of ideas to start thinking about conversation topics. And it really turns into, kind of a chase all the various rabbit holes process on some level, but it just fundamentally starts with getting an on paper, or rather getting an impression from the people I'm talking to onto paper, right, to give me something to start working with. And where the really fascinating opportunities often come out is when I take that, whatever that thing is on paper, put it in front of the CEO, and they say, that's not how my company works. I'm like, this is how your company works based on everybody that I've talked to, right? So your perception is different from what I've actually gathered, right? So I, not to say I'm right, but like, that's where the gap is. That's where we need to go.
I actually have very similar experience as a fractional CTO, where you come in and really I'm with you. I think the best way to get up to speed quickly is to speak to the stakeholders. In my case, though, of course, I'll talk to the, if there's a call center, I'll talk to the call center operators. I ask them specific questions about what software they're using. I act sort of like I don't have any knowledge about it at all. I just want to hear what they have to say. And you get told a lot of interesting things. And you're right. The very first time I ever had this experience, it was really surreal to go to a CEO who seemed like, in the whole process of negotiating the deal with them and getting hired by them, he seemed so on the ball and knowledgeable about his company. Yep. And then when you start talking to him, he's like, that's not how we operate here. Well, that's not what everyone else is telling me. It's kind of funny to see like how disconnected they actually can be while still really being on top of their game. It's just sort of interesting to me. But
the really interesting thing that I've seen, and I know I'm not the first fractional to observe this, because I actually found a post from another fractional like 2 years ago that had exactly the same observation. But a lot of the conversations that I have, in kind of the exploratory phase with CEOs, start with some sort of statement like, the people I have just aren't cutting it. Like, okay, we'll continue to dig into that. And then it often turns into, all right, the people, that I have don't have the right process. Okay. But at no point during these conversations is there, proactive awareness of like, oh, the people who aren't cutting it might be me, right? And what I honestly find a lot of the time is the changes that need to happen are in some way being kind of blocked by the CEO, right? They've set up a culture or a process that, creates them as the single bottleneck on all decisions or whatever it may be. They are often kind of the inhibiting force, or at least the person that I need to most strongly reinforce a change. So I've kind of come to view a lot of my work as CEO whispering. And again, this is the phrase that the other person used as well. So I know I've not made that up. But again, an aspect of the work that I didn't really anticipate. A lot of time you come in thinking, okay, I know how to build products. That is what I can deliver to companies. Instead, a lot of the time I find I am really, pseudo armchair therapist / business advisor to the CEOs, because the problems, again, are not complex. Like, they need to ingest them in a way that helps them to change, and then their company can change following that.
So you've worked in two highly regulated spaces that I personally consider to be very resistant to change or anything different, fintech and insurtech. So how do you bring innovation into environments like that when they resist it?
Yeah, it is certainly a challenge. I think fundamentally, I would say there isn't like an inherent tension, well, there necessarily between regulation and innovation. In fact, if you look at it kind of from the right angle, regulation is just, it's giving you a smaller box, sure, but innovation often happens within a very constrained environment in the first place, right? And knowing exactly what can I do, what can I not do, and then getting creative within those boundaries often leads to a lot more innovation than complete greenfield thinking. So I think the environment is conducive to innovation if you can approach it correctly. I think what is often inhibiting innovation is frankly some of the way that these companies have structured themselves. What you often find is you will have legal or other roles within the business who view their job as, I need to keep this company safe, right? Not necessarily even I need to keep our customers safe, but I need to prevent this company from getting sued or
Exactly.
Otherwise losing money, right? And so I think unintentionally probably, but they become kind of these inhibiting forces. You come up with a new idea and they say, nope, that's dangerous.
So what's the biggest myth about fractional product leadership that founders or maybe CEOs still believe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's kind of a perception still of lesser quality, perhaps, right? Like if you're really that good, shouldn't you be full time at Meta or whatever? And I think that is I'm obviously going to be a little bit biased towards myself, but I think that's fundamentally wrong, right? What I'm trying to articulate to a large extent is it's a different ballgame to a large. I get to work with multiple different companies. I have been exposed to cultures, to challenges, to people that I don't think I have ever met before. That's a huge learning opportunity for me. So somebody who's always really been motivated by, being a generalist, really trying to expand my peripheral vision rather than, hone in on one specific thing. This is that opportunity on steroids for me, right? I rather than focusing on one tiny little aspect of one product, at a very granular level. Granted, yes, I own, $100 million segment at some of these, big tech companies, but it's like this tiny, tiny little slice of the product. I get to own the entire product for multiple companies in different industries, in different, cultural subtexts that I've never seen before. It's all just a huge learning opportunity for me. And I think, frankly, it makes me, well, hopefully over time at least, it makes me a better PM. It makes me a better leader. It makes me a better executive because I think getting all of that pattern recognition.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think like when I was a CTO, I was working way too many hours. And so I came up with what I now call the decentralized A-team method. And that once I moved on from, working as a CTO full time and started doing fractional work, it helps me a lot because I'm still leading large teams of people. But because I have a method that kind of allows me to step back, they're not so reliant from day one. They're not so reliant on me. They're reliant on their own skills. And I think it's sharpened me up quite a bit as well. So I totally agree with you on that. So let's say you walk into a startup, right? And you smell dysfunction. What's your first instinctual move?
I mean, I think any startup, particularly if you're talking early stages, dysfunction is going to come from the CEO or the co-founders. I think my first conversations would probably, again, be with the people who are actually experiencing that, right? So I can get a clear lens on not just is there dysfunction, but what particular flavor, who's feeling it, how, why, right? But then I think that has to get reflected back up, to the CEO, to the co-founders, to the people who are actually determining ways of working. I think it's a pretty rare case that you truly have, like 9 fantastic people and 1 toxic person who's ruining everything, right? At least I've not encountered that very frequently. A lot of the time people are kind of labeled underperformers, don't have the right skill set, not right for Series A. Like I've certainly heard that. When in reality, they're just not being given something they need, right? Whether that's context, empowerment, encouragement, frankly. And so identifying kind of what is missing, where is this, what's the source at a very fundamental level of this dysfunction, really helps to hone in on, what do I have to then share with the CEO, leaders, whoever it may be. It's often not the surface level problem, right? I've honestly yet to have somebody come to me and have correctly diagnosed the source of their dysfunction, which I think, is kind of a good sign. That means hopefully that's job security for me. But I think it's really fascinating digging down. I mean, again, this is core PM work. What do you say you want? What do you think you need versus what do you actually need, right? It's just the same pattern.
Yeah, it's always sticking. It's always about sticking to the basics, really. I think that's things that people miss. But so if someone said to you, because someone said this to me once, if someone said, well, fractional just means fractional impact, what's a story that you might tell to shut that down?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories that I have are kind of in progress right now, but I mean, I think I'll keep it a little bit of a high level. What I've seen more than anything is that I've been able to come into these companies and drive shifts in the mentality and the culture, at least of the teams that I'm touching most directly, very quickly. And the commonality there is, I'm working primarily with both, kind of mature private companies, enterprise level companies, some smattering in between. But they're mostly companies that have operated within a very specific context and a very, kind of hardened way of working for long periods of time. And that has really just kind of become ingrained in their culture and, how people think, act, et cetera. And simply through the act of coming in and being like, hey, I'm new here, I'm going to poke into everything, right? You tell me that something is the way it is. I'm not going to just accept that at face value. Why is it the way it is? When have we tried to challenge that? Can we do it better? Right? Just going through this series of questions, forces people to think critically in order to give me answers. And then often what I find is they'll jump on board, right? It's often very hesitant at first, right? Like, I don't know if this is okay. The last person I saw ask questions like this got fired, so I don't know. And I'm like, listen, they brought me in for a reason. That reason is to dig into why things aren't working, right? Critical thinking is part of that. So let's, really engage in this process. And then, over brief periods of time, in my experience, it takes a month, 2 months. People start to wake up, right? And that's really when I get excited because I'm like, I'm not the only agent of change here anymore, right? All of these people are now on board. They're asking things I didn't think to ask because they have much deeper context than me, right? And that's, something that can and should ideally persist after I leave, right? One of the things that I'm also very clear with my clients on is I don't want to set up a scenario where you only get value as long as I'm, in the room, right? That to me is not driving scalable impact. I want to give you ways of thinking, ways of working, ways of, doing business that you can take and run with. And a large part of that is having them start to be ingrained into the people who are at your company full time, right? So that process of just going through and kind of, honestly, I think about it as just kind of waking people up, right? You've kind of, worked in a corporate environment for too long. Let's start, challenging some of the assumptions that we have. That is what really starts to drive sustainable change at these companies. And I think the impacts of that are numerous, right? You get better written documentation, you get, clearer ideation, you get people who are actually like, oh, hey, I'm going to go talk to a customer for the first time in, years, right? All these little things, I think more so than any big change that I can really deliver, all those little things are what actually starts to make the company, one that can actually drive impact for its customers over time.
Yeah, so true. I mean, it is interesting. I'm glad to hear you say what you said about, you want whatever impact you create to last beyond when you're there. Mm-hmm. I've said that to many, many clients myself. They wonder sometimes, like, well, why are you asking so many questions about what's going to happen in the future? Well, that's, I'm supposed to give you a strategy to get there, and I might not be here to help you with that. So we need to talk about that now. So, you've led inside of giant companies, and now you guide them from the outside. What's one principle you wish every founder and product leader understood before building anything?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think it's some variation of you are not your customer. um, I see this play out at really early stages and really late stages alike. It's uh, you get so entranced with the market, with the idea that you have, that it just becomes, I know exactly what my customer wants, and then over time you just stop asking them, right? And that is pretty much, it can happen quickly, it can happen slowly, but regardless, that's kind of when all the problems start to creep in, right? When you disconnect from your customer long enough that you start to get things wrong, right? And one of the, kind of the at least mental exercises I like to go through, because a lot of the times, that's a bit of a hard conversation to have with CEOs and leaders, right? Where you're just like, hey, by the way, you don't actually really know what you're talking about when you talk about the customer. Kind of one of the ways to exemplify that is, let's say you're 95% right, 99% right, but pick a really high number. How many decisions do you think you've made relating to that customer over the course of whatever the last 1, 5, 10 years, right? And then we can do the math to see how right you are in aggregate. It's not very high, right? So constantly checking back in, making sure that you are validating your assumptions, keeping an open mind, trying to learn rather than apply your assertions to your customers, I think is really integral. It says a lot to me that I think if I have it correct, the last 3 full-time roles that I had before shifting to fractional work, I had to bring in UX research, not only just as a function, but as a complete concept for the very first time to all 3 of those companies, right? And that to me should be baked in. If you're not listening to your customers, if you're not distilling their insights into action for yourself, like you're probably getting a lot of things wrong.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was thinking about when you were saying that, I worked for at the time it was the country's largest restaurant delivery service, and think Grubhub, right? In fact, Grubhub bought them out. But essentially they were run by 3 guys who, they put their money in, they worked every role in the company, and now, they're running the place. One was VP of marketing, one was VP of sales, and the other was the CEO. And one of the biggest revenue streams was catering, obviously. I mean, you're not going to make a lot of money off of someone buying their dinner at night, especially back then. And the biggest cut of that was pharmaceutical representatives, because that's how they got to talk to doctors, was they'd bring in lunch to the doctor. And so we were working on features for our website for pharmaceutical reps. And the 3 guys just kept saying, well, they don't like it like that. They like it like this. And our CFO finally said, it's not what I was told when I went with the sales team to talk to some of these farm reps. I think we need to have a focus group. So they did the old-fashioned focus group where they brought them in a little auditorium. We were in the back with the glass so we could see them, but they couldn't see us. And they were wrong about every single thing they said. Everything. The people had the complete opposite viewpoint. And it was really a turning point for the business that they got to see that, because after that, we had rather robust discussions around features in the product, because they began to realize, I don't know any more than the people that are working for me. So their opinions are just as valid as our opinions. And so we got a lot less of the, no, we're going to do this because I say so kind of approach. And the company grew like gangbusters after that, just because there was I think, less resistance to other people giving their input. It was huge. So I was thinking about that as you were saying, like, they don't know how many times they touch that customer, for instance, and it kind of shocks me what you said about, because I mean, you've worked for some big companies, and for them not to have any kind of UX research that just shocks me. Like, we had that at the little tiny company. So I mean, it's shocking to me. So this has been really intriguing to me. I love the product side of things. It's something I would have probably gone into myself had I not basically decided to become a programmer. But why don't you let the audience know how they can get in touch with you if they want to connect?
Yeah, thank you. So everything related to my business, writings that I've done, et cetera, you can find at rootedinproduct.com or look me up on LinkedIn under Rooted in Product. Either way, and yeah, we have full download of all the services that I provide. The other folks who are under my umbrella that I can subcontract for, all of the writings that I do on a weekly basis. So yeah, please stop on by.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
So Brian Root doesn't just need a corner office or a 5-year contract to make a product team move. From Fortune 500 to scrappy startups, he's proving that strategy, leaderships, and results aren't about time spent. They're about value delivered. If you're scaling a product and you think you need someone full-time to get real impact, go re-listen to this episode, or better yet, get rooted in product. And as always, hit subscribe, leave us a comment, and stay curious. We'll see you here next Wednesday for another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge.